Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, Jamar Tisby, and I am joined, as always, by Diana Butler Bass,
Good to see you all.
Kristen Dumais,
Hey, Jamar.
and Robbie Jones.
Hey, Jamar.
We're scholars, three historians and a sociologist who explore how religion shapes America's past and present. But there's a twist. One of us picks a topic and the rest of us don't know exactly what's coming. So, no prep, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. And that's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. This episode is officially in session. Good to see everyone again. How are folks doing? Anything new? Anything fun or exciting? Any comings and goings you want to report on?
Well, I really liked the snow this week in Washington, D.C. On Tuesday night, it was complete. It was this fast and hard snowstorm. It shut down the city immediately, and everything was quiet.
Mm,
And I got to tell you, a noiseless Washington, D.C. right now is like a holy gift. And so I just embraced that and wished that we could have more, but I was happy to take advantage of what we had.
I recently heard or read like the acoustic effects of snow that it literally absorbs sound, and so that's why it feels so quiet on snowy wintry days. So I can absolutely see how that would be wonderful in this season. Anyone else? Any trips or updates or something fun or interesting folks
Well,
about?
I'll just piggyback on that. Add one thing. Again, looking for places of joy in these days. But our little dog in the snow, there's nothing like just the pure joy. And Diana said it came so fast that like we had let her out earlier in the day and it wasn't there, right? And so then when we let her out, she was like, whoa, snow, and like just like spun around the yard for like 10 or 15 minutes, was doing nothing but like barking and just running in circles around the backyard, and came in just, she's got this kind of long curly hair, so she had like just snow like all over her face, all over her body. And brought her in. My son was like, what are we gonna do with her? I mean, she was literally just covered in snow, and I was like, I think we're gonna have to let her melt, and then we're gonna towel her off. Is basically what we're gonna
Wow.
do. Yeah.
What kind of dog is it?
Oh, she's a little, combination poodle golden retriever. So golden doodle, kind of mid-sized golden doodle.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah,
The
she's
pure
she's
joy
great.
of animals. I love it. What about you, Kristen?
Yeah, we have a beautiful snow falling right now. I had to close my blinds because it's still a little bright out there. My kids were devastated this morning to not have a snow day. The snow day calculator gave them a 99% chance, so it was a little hard getting them out of bed
Mhm.
this morning. But no, otherwise we've had some family sicknesses this week, and so I am not at Notre Dame like I usually am on a Thursday. Just sticking a little closer to home and hoping to get to the other side of this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Everybody seems to be really like two thumbs up about snow.
How's the
I
snow in Kentucky?
Yeah,
I
how's
am not a snow
Kentucky?
fan. I grew up north of Chicago and I am done with winter for the foreseeable future. I'd be good without snow most of the time except to visit. So I was actually out of town when Louisville got its snow. I was in Houston for a recording retreat for my other podcast, Pass the Mic. And so we had a great time. Me, Bo York, our producer, Tyler Burns, my co-host, and Ryan Gentry, who does our video. So we had a wonderful time talking everything on and off mic, from Star Wars to food. And I got to try the new non-alcoholic tequila brand put on by Lewis Hamilton, who is a Formula One driver, the only African American black Formula One driver. He's British. Um, Not great. Not great.
Right.
I hate to say it, but in
Yeah.
case folks were wondering, it's worth a try. Buy a bottle, have your own opinion. But yeah, I don't know that I'll repeat that.
As soon as you say tequila and British,
Well, and non-alcoholic. So, I wanted to see if technology could work a miracle, and it was more like somebody called it snow cone syrup. So
Ooh.
well, we got to start with some levity. It's interesting that we're trying to sort of derive joy from some of the small and simple things in life. And we're talking about, life under this regime where everything is so fraught and so heavy, and we got to work so hard to survive, let alone smile and find joy. But we do see, I think, a little bit of coalescing of some forms of resistance, some pushback. So, someone brought up something that recently happened. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I've been really happy about the legal cases. And part of it is because my kid is getting ready to go to law school. And, you have to have a lot of hope right now to become a lawyer. So I'm being informed that all things are not bleak and, and that the law will do its job. And it's easy, I think, for some of us who feel really bad about all that's going on just to say, well, they're going to ignore the law. But the more that these legal cases keep coming out, and I hear people who are like my peers saying, oh, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, they're going to ignore the law. That's actually just a way of giving in. You know, Timothy Snyder, don't give up in advance. Well, don't give up in advance to believing one, that they're going to ignore the law or that the courts won't figure out some way to enforce the law. So I'm not going to give up in advance. I'm going to cheer these cases. And the best one, because we talk about religion and politics here, is there was a religion and politics suit filed. There was one that was filed by the Quakers almost, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, almost immediately after the administration came into place.
Here in
Uh,
Maryland, they filed that suit. I'm happy
yeah,
to say. Yep.
Maryland Quakers did.
Yep.
In order to be able to guard their religious freedom, to care for refugees, and to uh, come against the policy of the Trump administration to be able to go into houses of worship in order to be able to find people who they feel like are here illegally and to remove those people. So the violation of worship spaces. And so the Quakers did that. But this suit that was filed is very similar. It's on the basis of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what's different about it is it's not just one denomination, but instead it's 24 different religious bodies, including it's the shorthand version of it because the top plaintiff is the Mennonite Church. So it's Mennonite Church USA versus the Department of Homeland Security, but underneath that is the AME Zion Church, AME, the Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. And so that's the second plaintiff, the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ, the Conference of American Rabbis, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, an entire mainline denomination, Church of the Brethren, another major peace denomination along with the Mennonites, the Convention of Baptist Hispanics in San Antonio, Texas, the Episcopal Church, another mainline denomination, etc. It goes on. It's interdenominational and includes peace churches, mainline churches, and a few evangelical networks, including at least two networks of Hispanic evangelicals. The Methodists are on this, the National Council of Churches, all kinds of people. And then there's two different rabbinic groups. And so it's a really wonderful spread. I think, and I just like this part of it. And I think that you all will like it too, because the opening of this legal case that was filed in Washington, D.C., um, reads almost like a theology paper. Plaintiffs in this challenge are 12 national denominational bodies and representatives, 4 regional denominational bodies, and 11 denominational and interdenominational associations, all rooted in the Jewish and Christian faiths. Plaintiffs and their members are Baptist, Brethren, Conservative, Jewish, Episcopalian, Evangelical, Mennonite, Quaker, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, Reconstructionist Jewish, Reformed Jewish, Unitarian Universalist, United Methodist, Zion Methodist, and more. They bring this suit unified on a fundamental belief. Every human being, regardless of birthplace, is a child of God, worthy of dignity, care, and love. Welcoming the stranger or the immigrant is thus a central precept of faith practices. And then it goes on and says, this is the only other part I'll read. The Torah lays out this tenet 36 times, more than any other teaching. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love them as yourself, for you were strangers in Egypt. In the Gospels, Jesus not only echoes this command, but he self-identifies with the stranger. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. The plaintiff's religious scriptures, teaching, and traditions offer clear, repeated, and irrefutable unanimity on their obligations to embrace, serve, and defend refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants in their midst without regard to documentation or legal status. And then they go on and they sue the Department of Homeland Security for their treatment, their violation of the religious freedom of millions of Americans to do this very thing. So I'm cheering that one on.
Yeah, it's important, like, to go back and like think about like, so what is that policy that Trump rescinded, and why? And if you think about the background of it, it's this. And by the way, the policy of it's called sensitive locations, right? And it prohibited ICE from conducting raids at what it called sensitive locations. They had very clear definitions of what a sensitive location was, and churches and synagogues and other places of worship were a sensitive location, but also hospitals, schools, right? Places like that. So, and why is that policy in place? It was there and it's been there for 3 decades, right? Across Republican and Democratic administrations. It's there as a measure of compassion, right? And as a measure of respecting, like, you don't want to put people in the position of saying, do I not pick my kid up from school today because I'm worried I'm going to be arrested, right? Do I not take my kid to the emergency room because I'm worried, or do I not take myself to the emergency room because I'm worried I'm going to be arrested there? Can I not go to church and worship or go to synagogue and worship because and the government, again, Republican and Democratic administrations have realized that they can still enforce the law and do it humanely, right? That it was not about skirting the law, but it was about trying to do it in ways that respected these sensitive locations and the functions that the important functions that they serve in communities all over the country.
Food pantries, of course, in churches feed large numbers of people who are in immigrant communities. And also think about homeless shelters or domestic violence ministries that might be run out of churches. So for churches and synagogues, it's about far more than just people even coming to worship. It is literally about the kinds of social services that keep people alive. And all over the country, we've been hearing little reports, sort of here and there, scattershot reports about the sudden drop in people coming to food pantries that are located in congregations because they were afraid that there might be an ICE raid in the parking lot of a food pantry in a church. So this is a very comprehensive sort of rescission that really put people in danger for basic human need.
Diana, I was thinking as you were reading some of the opening there, you said, this is theology. This starts off with theology. And it reminded me too of the Pope's intervention this past week with our vice president, setting the record straight. And I think we're going to be seeing more of this. I think we need to be seeing more of this, because within a kind of Christian nationalist framework, right, the Christian faith is being used to justify the administration's policies in ways that we all know run counter to traditional historical interpretations of the scriptures, that run counter to these core beliefs. And we need religious leaders to speak with authority out of that tradition, right? And many of us can do that so well because we have lived within those teachings. We have drawn on those teachings for to inspire the work that we do, to direct our charitable giving and to really order our lives. And so I would expect to see much more of that. And I think that, when people are saying, what can we do? What can we do? Yes, you can get the app and you can make your 5 phone calls a day. Absolutely. But for people of faith, there's an open invitation here to speak out in person, in public, however you can, to say, wait, no. This is impeding with my religious liberty, and to refuse to cede that ground. I think that's incredibly important.
And there's a petition, I should just mention, we'll put it in the show notes too, but it's sensitive-locations.com. There's a petition that you can actually sign on and call for the Trump administration to rescind this memo, and also call on Congress to pass a law so that it's not just guidance, but actually the law of the land, that these kind of invasions of sensitive locations won't be possible in the future.
And some people ask me about who is sponsoring the petition. It's the Georgetown Center for Faith and Justice, and and I understand them asking that question because they were worried about, like, well, who's going to get my email address and all those kinds of things. These are incredibly trustworthy people, and if you can't feel that your email is going to be safe with the Georgetown Center for Faith and Justice, I can't help you.
Run by Jim Wallace. Yeah.
Yeah, he said this is a good group. This is a safe group, and these are trustworthy people.
What this reminds me of is a couple of things. Robbie, there's a Mississippi connection. Remember, it was the largest immigration raid in at least a decade that happened in 2019, where officials raided 7 Mississippi chicken processing plants. Yep, arresting right. 680, mostly Latino workers in the largest workplace sting in at least a decade. And that was, these were people working, contributing, doing really hard labor that most of us wouldn't want to do. Hundreds of agents surrounded these factories, so folks couldn't slip through. You had children crying that their parents were being rounded up. You had literal buses full of people being filled, right? And imagine that at a church or a place of worship or some facility where folks are going to get food or help or anything like that, medical care. And that's what we're talking about. Like, one of the things that I think are increasingly seeing is that the personal is political and the political is personal, right? So these are not just abstract policies out there. They're affecting real people. And that, I think, lends urgency to the actions that we need to take, urgency to lawsuits like this. And at the same time, I had your same reaction, Kristen, of what a wonderful time to be doing theology. I put out on social media a while ago, like, this is a really opportune moment to have a 21st century theological anthropology. What do we believe about humanity, about people created in the image and likeness of God? And how do you apply these transcendent religious theological beliefs to the contemporary issues of our age around immigration, around sexuality, around race, around patriarchy, all of these things that we're dealing with and are now being enforced in their most regressive, oppressive forms through policy from the highest level. So it reminds me of that Toni Morrison quote, which I think of at least once a day. She said, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. And I think we could say something similar. This is precisely the time when people of faith go to work and we speak and we write and we do theology. And that's how civilizations heal.
Yeah, I'm also struck too that this is not because I think it often gets juxtaposed against the rule of law or enforcing the law, but it's about how the law is enforced, right? And that tells us something about our nation's character. Are we, back to the kind of childhood separation policies that had no point except to traumatize parents and be cruel, right? And or putting barbed wire and razor wire in the Rio Grande so that people who are crossing aren't just going to get prohibited from coming in the country, but might actually drown, right? These are things that are about cruelty, right? And just wanton cruelty. And that's the reason why that sense of locations policy was there in the first place for 3 decades, because Republicans and Democrats realized like we can enforce the law and we can do it humanely. And that's something sort of people of faith can do. And again, it is about who are we and who do we think the other is, or who do we think the stranger is? What's that theology? Do we even pretend to have a theology about that anymore?
Yeah, and the Jamar's quote, I think is really important as well because it underscores the other part of this. It is, of course, about how do we care for people, how do we execute the law, but engage with humanity and justice and care for the other have to go hand in hand. But the piece of it that Sir Jamar's points to me is the fact that if people of faith speak out, we have to make sure that we have the freedom to do that. And so in effect, this lawsuit is about these caring for the immigrants, but it's about the religious freedom of these groups to do what they feel they have to do by virtue of their faith. And so right now, in the early stages of this administration, it was super important for some religious groups to lay down that line. Because if they get away with this, what's to say that you get up to preach a sermon on Sunday and some, MAGA person doesn't like what you preach and they call, some official and say that you're preaching treason or you're encouraging people to break the law by loving their neighbor as themselves, and you wind up getting in trouble. And there's an incursion on the church or a synagogue, not simply for feeding hungry people, which is important enough, but for then beginning to actually do as Jamar suggested, and that is speaking up on the behalf of the poor, of the oppressed, of just speaking the gospel. So religious freedom has to be preserved early on. They cannot come in to your church or your synagogue and tell you what to do or what to say. And if anybody tried to do this to any evangelical that's been yelling about religious freedom for a long time, they would be rioting in the streets. They have been, and this is religious freedom for everybody, not just religious freedom for people who happen to have the president they like.
You remember during COVID, they were hollering religious freedom so that they could meet during a deadly viral pandemic and saying it's a violation of my religious freedom because medically you're saying we cannot meet. It's so frustrating to see people in the name of religion twisting morality like that and using kind of similar language and principles, religious freedom in this instance, to do something that is in so many ways anti-human, anti-life, at least, right? And then totally flip the script and now quash truly foundational kinds of religious freedom, like caring for the immigrant and the refugee. And they're using the same language. So this is where we need to be savvy as people of faith and as members of this national community. It's like just because they use the same words absolutely does not mean it means the same thing. And they will they will flip it around and they will take advantage of it and they will make it so it works for them, but actually violates rights and freedoms of so many other people that are much more basic, much more foundational, much clearer than whatever they're asserting. But as you're talking, Diana, just reminded me of these hollers for religious freedom in 2020 and 2021 when we were trying to socially distance so we wouldn't get sick and compromise people's health.
The interesting thing, of course, is that the Supreme Court supported that. And so when they took that to the highest legal authority in the land, they said, yeah, those people have a right to meet. You can't tell them that they can't meet. And so at this point, then we have to turn around and say, hello, we have the right to take care of the poor. We have a right to feed immigrants. We have a right. This is part of who we are. And if there is any consistency left at all in the law, which my kid tells me that there has to be, we're going to have to just push this as far as we can and hope that the Supreme Court comes to the same conclusion when they look at cases like this.
Diane,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I just wanted to reflect on a point that you've raised a couple of times so far in different ways, talking about using the law to its full extent, not ceding that, and for religious communities as well, pressing this issue and not ceding that ground. It reminded me of a really excellent piece in Sojourners that came out this week by Daniel Hunter. I don't know if you saw that. I'm going to be reflecting on it on my own Substack this weekend. But he gives some pointers for resilience during this time. And one of them is connected to what you quoted about not obeying in advance, right? Timothy Snyder's mantra, do not self-censor. And here's what Hunter says. Political space that you don't use, you lose. I think we all need to reflect on that daily because it's disorienting. We've talked before about how overwhelming things are. And there's a lot of fear bubbling up as people start to see, oh, this is what we're dealing with, right? And the temptation is self-preservation and just retreat and keep your mouth shut. That's exactly the wrong thing to do right now, right? That political space that you don't use, you lose. We have to use all the space that we have all the time in all the directions. And he goes on to say this is for all levels of society. Lawyers advising nonprofits, leaders worried about their funding base, folks worried about losing their jobs. He says, I'm not coaching you to never self-protect. You can decide when to speak your mind, but we have to combat this slippery slope. In Timothy Snyder's book and video series on tyranny, he cites ceding power as the first problem. Most of the power, Snyder writes, of authoritarianism is freely given. Most of the power is freely given. Individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want, and then they offer themselves without being asked. And a citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. Put simply, use the political space and the voice that you have. And I think that is what we all have to hold on to, all have to remind ourselves and remind each other to use all of the space that we have so that we can press out and create more space and preserve what we do have.
Just one thought on the back end of that, that as I've been reflecting on, these mantras about not ceding space, not obeying in advance, it occurs to me though that like my first thought about that was like, oh, we got to do that to kind of be out here. But I didn't really think about, but even those moves might cost us something, right? So I think that the sort of first knee jerk, oh, of course, don't obey in advance. But I think thinking more clearly about it, not obeying in advance may cost you something, right? Even out of the gate. So it's not just about like preserving something, but even out of the gate. But it's that resistance that throws some sand in the gears that makes them have to go back and try something else. Like they may still prevail, but slowing it down actually matters as well. And it means that, we might not kind of win that battle, but it means that the next battle line behind us can be drawn while that line is being held, right? Even if it ultimately falls back.
Yep. And you might lose your battle, but maybe you've inspired a few more people to fight other battles, right? And I think this is how this works too.
Jamar, I'm just curious about the use of the law among Black church leaders in the civil rights movement. You might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great connection. Like historically, Black people in particular, which I study, we haven't had a lot of recourse politically in many cases, and we've had to use the law. So in my latest book, The Spirit of Justice, I write about Charles Hamilton Houston. He's a fascinating figure, person of faith, who grew up in the D.C. area and became a lawyer. He built Howard's Law School into the most well-respected Black law school in the nation, but just bar none, an excellent law school across the board. And he talked about lawyers being social engineers. I know the far right hates that term, but he talked about them. He's like, what are you in the law for if you're not using it to make society a better, more equitable place? And the reason Charles Hamilton Houston, we should all know him, is because A, he built up this HBCU law school into this incredible almost factory churning out Black lawyers. I think at one point it was churning out a quarter of all Black lawyers in the country. But he also worked for the NAACP. And with the NAACP, he led their legal efforts, and he was the architect of the strategy for challenging segregation, which is interesting strategy, right? He didn't challenge just the principle of separating people by race. What he challenged was the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson portion that said separate but equal. And so he brought cases and he found cases where they were indeed separate, but by no means equal. So there was a case, I think in Missouri, right, where a Black person was applying, I think maybe to a musical department or something of that nature at a state institution. They denied him because he was Black, but there was no alternative in the state for Black people. So it couldn't be equal. And that's the basis on which they won the case about Brown v. Board. It wasn't just, oh, separating people is bad. It's that you said it was supposed to be equal, but you are not funding them on an equal basis. So it's actually breaking this Supreme Court decision all the way from 1896. And of course, we can look at other cases as well. And it has been the law. What's going to be interesting is how the law is enforced, because we're seeing this administration completely ignore court orders, legal precedents, these stopgaps that have traditionally been the line in the sand for most officials and administrations. Judges, law enforcement, they're going to have to come down hard on anybody who violates the law. And that's what remains to be seen at this point.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I just kept thinking about the civil rights movement, and like, I mean, African Americans, they had no reason to even trust the law, as it were. I mean, so it's made me discouraged that so many white people are just like, oh, well, let's not even try. This is a big waste of money. They're not gonna pay attention to law. I think, well, if every Black person in the history of America had that attitude, we'd all still have enslavement practiced
Oh, yeah.
across the country. I mean, so things do change, and the law can and does work.
And
So
we're recording this still during Black History Month, and one of the things that I'm paying close attention to are these attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes they add the A for accessibility. And it's really interesting. So I want to read from an executive order, one of the several executive orders that have come down around DEI. This one is called Ending Radical. They always love to use that word radical, don't they? Ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. So, Section 1, Purpose and Policy, the Biden administration, just to pin the blame on the Democrats and the previous president, forced, listen to this, illegal and immoral discrimination programs. Isn't that interesting? So they're saying it's illegal which it's not, right? But they're saying it's a violation of the law, therefore punishable by the law, right? And then they go even further. They say illegal and immoral.
Yeah.
So now there's an ethical weight to having DEI programs and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is a moral wrong that they're saying. Going by the name diversity, equity, inclusion, in virtually all aspects of the federal government, areas ranging from airline safety to the military. Well, we know what Trump did after that tragic airline collision in DC. First thing he did is blame DEI, underqualified, unqualified pilots and officials and all of that stuff. And then said it's a concerted effort from the Biden administration. Then the order is that each agency, department, or commission head shall take the following actions within 60 days of this order. And this was at the end of January. Terminate to the maximum extent allowed by law all DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice offices and positions. Now, isn't that interesting? So they talk about DEI, but then they throw in environmental justice. Now we can't take care of the planet either, because that's DEI too. And we should understand the racial implications of pollution. Many of the factories, the toxins, the chemicals are placed in low income areas, which have high percentages of Black and brown people. So there is a racial element to environmental justice efforts. And they have to get rid of that within 60 days. And now, to your point, Kristen, about most power is freely given away. That's what's happening
Yes.
so this executive order is about the federal government, but people are seeing that and they're obeying in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, John, I'm so glad you brought this up. Like, I'm actually writing on this now. So this is a good unscripted moment. We did not talk about this. But I'm writing on this now, and I decided one thing that I might do in the spirit of levity that we began is I might start giving away a Trump Court Jester of the Week award. And just pick somebody, right, who's just done the most absurd signal, kind of, vice signaling to kind of get on Trump's radar. I'm going to give it this week to someone from a state of Missouri, where I used to live, Attorney General Andrew Bailey of Missouri. Have any of you followed this crazy story of what's going on there? So Attorney Andrew Bailey of Missouri is trying to get on the Trump DEI train. We're in the wake of this executive order that you're issuing here. He has decided to sue Starbucks.
Oh, yes.
All right. Now, here's what he's suing them for.
For their coffee being black.
No. That would be a good guess. And actually, that would have more legal logic to it than actually what he's suing them for. He is suing Starbucks because their workforce is more female and less white than it was in 2020. Now, that's like kind of crazy enough. But when you look at the logic of the lawsuit, here's what it actually says. He says, again, with no evidence cited, because there'd be no evidence you could cite, but this workforce shift, again, being less, it literally says more female and less white, has forced Missouri consumers to, quote, pay higher prices and wait longer for goods and services because DEI programs, quote, skew the hiring pool towards people who are less qualified to perform the work.
Because women are not good at
Women
serving
and brown
food.
people are serving coffee and they do it slower than white men would do. Like, literally, this is what the order says. So I was a math major, right? And I am gonna dub this. I'm doing this in my Substack, A.G. Bailey's Law, going forward here. And it, like, the Boolean logic is not male or not white. If not male or not white, then less qualified. And it's just it's just never been as clear than the logic in this order. So there you go.
I can't wait for you to
Attorney
write
General
that
Bailey gets my Trump Court Jester of the Week award.
Oh my gracious. First of all, that's a great idea.
I'm remembering back to graduate school when there were way more men in our graduate program than there were women. And every single time the coffee in the graduate student lounge got made, it was by a woman. And the guys used to look at us like, we go in, there was no coffee. They would look at us like, why didn't you make the coffee? So it's like that's a really weird reversal because that's
So
what women
speaking of
do.
moments of levity here, one very rare bright spot on X this week was around the discussion of the Super Bowl halftime show. Right, with Kendrick Lamar. I don't know if you saw this, where there were some folks who were complaining that there were no white people dancing in the show. And there's one really great response by an African American woman who said, no, we got rid of DEI. It's only merit based and you're gonna end up with black dancers, right? And like, you can just see how only ever goes one way. And other folks were like, "Wait, I thought you were colorblind. How did you even notice that?" Right?
Yes, the whole Super Bowl, really, when you look
Oh,
at the commercials and the messaging, and definitely Kendrick Lamar had a blackety black Super Bowl halftime show that really ticked off the far white. And that
The
was
far white.
intentional. The far white.
I
Yeah.
heard that too.
I think far right, far white, kind of works both ways. That was very intentional. He was being very subversive. He was putting Drake once again, not 6 feet under, but 12 feet under. He buried him again and again and again, but also making very strong political commentary for this moment. But it is really what I'm concerned about is racism is so embedded in this country that when we get these anti-DEI initiatives and orders, it's almost like background noise because of the latent racism that's all here. Now, I'm not saying people aren't concerned, but I don't think we've yet really grasped the impact and the implications. So, what's already happening? Higher ed institutions are
Yes.
remember how they hated defunding the police? They're defunding DEI programs across the board, right? They're shuttering programs or they're sort of reconfiguring them. A lot of them are coming now under HR as a portion, and it'll be more hidden and invisible and less potent and have less autonomy. And then you have corporations doing the same thing. But here's where it's really impacting. So my college, which is a historically black college, our college president sent out an all faculty, all staff email in the wake of one of these orders. And it was actually an inspirational message of, our college was founded under adversity. We are built for these times. We will not back down, kind of a thing. But it's I think it's the first one I can remember in the past couple of years coming from the president to all faculty, all staff. And it's about literally like an existential threat to our institution. And we are a little bit buffered because we're a private faith-based institution. But there was just a bill introduced in Kentucky, House Bill 4, would prevent colleges from using any resources on DEI initiatives, which is defined as a policy to, quote, promote or provide differential treatment or benefits based on a person's religion, race, sex, or national origin. And that extends from employee hiring to student admissions and recruitment and housing and scholarships. And if this passes, all university DEI offices and officers would close by June 30th. So here's one of the things I want to say. We were talking about language and how they're reversing language, right? We talk about religious freedom. They're doing the same thing with this word discrimination. So historically, when discrimination was used in racial justice spheres, it meant negative discrimination toward Black people, other people of color, women, other disenfranchised groups, right? It was unfair, it was illegal, it was immoral, everything they're saying this DEI stuff is. Now what they're using it's reverse discrimination. It goes back to what you were saying, Robbie. If they're not white and they're not male, then they're not getting a fair shake. And that's discrimination. Well, King said, I'm paraphrasing here, if something has done, if society has done something special against the Negro, it must now do something special for the Negro. And that's a sort of positive, if you will, form of discrimination. It's singling out a racial group because that racial group has been singled out for injustice. But now it's singling out that group for the benefits to repair from the injustices. But they're using that language, and I just want people to understand racism never goes away, it adapts. So it's going to take that language of discrimination, it's going to flip it and say, well, this is discrimination now against white people. And we got to know what's happening and what's going on.
And
It
the only
reminds me
way,
of Robbie's statistics because Robbie has questions on that in his data sets.
Just looking that up, Diana.
Go for it.
So we've asked, right? This question today, discrimination against white Americans has become as big a problem as discrimination against Black Americans and other minorities. So we've asked this over the years, been very, very steady. But I mean, so in the country, most Americans reject that statement. Most Americans disagree, a majority disagree. But among Republicans, it is 72% who agree with that statement. Among Democrats, it's 20. And among independents, it's about 4 and 10, right? So Republicans are just such the outlier here on this question. I mean, it's just kind of stunning when you think about that difference here, and that's been, very, very clear. Ever since we've been asking the question, you look at white evangelical Protestants, it's 2/3 who agree with that statement, and other white Christians are in majority territory as well, but nowhere near as high as white evangelicals. But it is white Christians who agree with that statement. White mainline Protestants, white Catholics, slim majorities, but it's 2/3 of white evangelicals.
Now,
It's pretty deep.
Add that the only way this works, if it works at all, is if you don't teach history.
That's right.
Right?
Hypocrite sister.
So, right, and not coincidentally, we also have in these executive orders, in fact, I think in the very same one, rules against teaching unpatriotic history. Any history that makes a group feel bad about anything that has happened in the past. Now, I mean, obviously, this is absolutely absurd, but you see how these two things go hand in hand. You cannot study history writ large, history of anything, right? Okay, Calvinist here. Humans are sinful, right? Humans do bad things. History is a story of those things. There are some bright spots, but there's a lot of bad stuff in history. There just is. But now suddenly when it comes to our own country's history, we have to only pick up the good parts. And the good parts aren't even good because they're not true, because they are not in the context of the darker side, right? The truth, the goodness, the bright spots come out only when we recognize the darkness that surrounds them, right? The heroic moments, the people who have risen above their self-interest, risen above their social location, and have done heroic things. So this isn't that there's a negative history and a positive history. That's not how this works. There is a true history, and that true history will have some negative things in it, quote unquote negative things. But it will also have the truly good things in it, and they go hand in hand. And so as a historian, I don't know how I go into the classroom if this becomes somehow an enforceable law of the land. And it's not because I don't like to teach inspiring history. I love doing that. I love teaching the transformative stories of the past. I mean, Jamar, look at your last book. Gorgeous stories. But that's not what they mean, right? I mean, that makes me feel patriotic when I read that book. And there are books about white people that make me feel patriotic too, who are fighting injustice, right? I don't know how we do history, real history, true history, as professionals under this regime. And I'll be curious to find out. And I'm sure we will.
Let me give one more real world example of how this DEI stuff is affecting. I got an email from my son's school asking permission to show a film about race. And if I asked each one of you what film you would guess it would be, this is for like 8th grade and whatnot, you'd probably come up with some film that has something not questionable, but maybe tense, right?
Birth of a Nation?
Exactly. No, I promise you, no, none of us would have guessed it. The film is The Great Debaters.
Wow.
The Great Debaters. It's about an all-black debate team that sort of
Oh, right.
defied odds and expectations and was really good. But it's not even one of these films that's depicting, racial violence or even really bashing any group or anything. But that's where we are, where you have to ask permission as a teacher to teach about Black history during Black History Month.
Yeah. Are we sure it's still Black History Month? I think Google
I
has
mean,
decided it may not be.
you're absolutely right. Some like these services have taken down the anniversaries and the acknowledgments on their like standard calendars.
I think
Uh,
that Trump drowned it in the Gulf of America.
the Gulf of
Yeah.
America. So anyway, that was just like, what bizarro world are we living in? Needless to say, I said yes and heck yes. And to their credit, and one of the fun things, I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast yet, I did get to read the young readers version. So Stories of the Spirit of Justice, which is for 8 to 12-year-olds, and the picture book, I Am the Spirit of Justice. I did get to read that at his school. And it was
Awesome.
like a all school assembly. It was so fun, so cool.
That's
You know
great.
what, Jamar, that reminds me, my youngest overheard me and my husband talking about these things and talking about, Black History Month being no more. And she was distraught. She's like, "What are you talking about?"
Mm,
And so, this is one of these parenting moments, like what's the role here? Educate, comfort, both. And what I decided to say in that moment is like, "Oh, don't stress about it. We can read all the history that we want all the time." And I pulled out your books, right, which are sitting on my shelf. And I'm like, "Oh, we got this. Like, it does not matter what they say, because we can still celebrate this." And then the next day, she came back from school and she goes to a Christian school and was very glad to report that her school is still full on doing Black history, and they had it in their announcements, and they have a special exhibit in the library, and they have all of these things still. And just a reminder too that we're talking about the doom and gloom and the absolute absurdities of what we are experiencing, but to remember that each and every one of us has agency. You can pull the books, you can pull down the posters, or you can say, no, we're going to lean into this. And I mean, you talked about your own college being a private Christian college. I think a pretty strong case could be made to Christian institutions to lean into. We don't have to call it DEI. We were doing this before DEI was a thing. We talked about it just being in terms of the body of Christ, being in community, seeking justice, loving kindness, and the outgrowth of those core Christian teachings. It happens to be an inclusive environment where all flourish. I'd love to see that work its
This,
way up through the courts.
well, yeah, I was going to say this ties in with the first thing, talking about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. You know, I go into your daughter's school and tell them that they can't talk about Black History Month. That is a violation of the religious freedom of that community. And so that's why, backing this up and putting this up right at the very beginning of the Trump administration, saying religious freedom is in effect for every group and how they see these things to be central to their communities, to their traditions, and to the ways in which they preach. And so, yeah. And that what that means to me, and this is I've been encouraging people this way for a couple years now, is that as the political culture and the secular, whatever we want to call it, it moves toward this white nationalism and towards a kind of Christian theocracy, the only place where we can talk about the other stuff is in the churches and the religious bodies who don't agree with that. And so, beef up your library, put all of the banned books in your church library. Have your church celebrate Black History Month, just on and on. And so, they're going to have to come after private institutions and private religious institutions in order to silence us. And that takes a lot of work. And if the Supreme Court will back religious freedom at the beginning, might give them a few second or third thoughts about how they approach some of these issues.
Yeah, and I think for those of us who are Christian, we can lean into this anti-Christian bias thing as well, do a little jujitsu move on that, right? And say, yeah, that's right. We'll take, we don't like anti-Christian bias either. But anti-Christian bias is broad, right? Anti-Christian bias is beyond white evangelical Protestants. Anti-Christian bias is the National Council of Churches. It has to be protected. The Mennonites have to be protected, right? The Unitarians have to be protected, right? It's broad. And so, I think that's a way of saying, all right, well, fine, let's take that seriously then. And you can't just turn that into one type of Christianity that's being defended and the rest of it is being attacked.
And frankly, the National Association of Evangelicals may need to be protected too, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can use white evangelicals as a foil, but I think that when we look at some of the attacks being leveled against various Christian groups, they include evangelical groups or predominantly evangelical groups as well, right? So there's a right flank, a kind of Christian nationalist flank, and even many of the white evangelical organizations, humanitarian organizations, and various groups, they too are coming under fire. So things are really in flux right now. And it'll be interesting to see kind of where things settle in terms of who's going to line up to truly defend religious liberty in this moment.
I think last time we were together, I talked about the attack on the Lutherans, and that it wound up being kind of a all-purpose attack on all Lutherans, calling them names, and that included all these people in the Missouri Synod who cooperate in Lutheran social services. 1 hour after we recorded that conversation, the head of the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, the conservative Lutheran Church, came out and said, "Yeah, we're defending that." This is Lutheran social services should get this money because we do all this good work in Christ.
Mm.
And then he turned around and used it as a way of attacking the other Lutherans doctrinally.
Oh, no.
Wow.
And so it was like, I had hoped that the Missouri Synod Lutherans might rise to the occasion. They did not. But that's an example. What you're saying is like, okay, it's got to be a whole vision. And what part of the strategy I think is to actually create a religious freedom for me and not for thee kind of setting. But then we just press into that more and more and more, and keep saying, that won't fly. It won't fly in the courts, and it certainly doesn't fly in my church.
So, Kristen, did you have one more point you wanted to make? And I have a question, another unscripted question for us as we go out of here.
Okay, I don't have a point necessarily, but Robbie had just messaged me about a story that I had texted you all earlier this week, right? We stay in touch throughout the week, and it was an experience that I had at a college basketball game. Was there with a group of kids, and just normal things, grab some popcorn, hot dog, and then it was time to stand for the national anthem. And man, did that hit me hard, right? The big American flag, everybody's standing and hearing those words and feeling, you want to talk patriotism? Right. And I know for a long time, conservatives have claimed that liberals don't love their country, that only conservatives love their country. But my goodness, the things that we are doing and have been doing we're doing them out of love. We're doing them out of love for our fellow citizens, love for our neighbors who are not citizens, and we are doing them out of a fundamental love of our country. Right. And its highest aspirations. And, so I guess I'll say it felt like such a poignant moment. And it also, felt deeply patriotic, and a kind of patriotism that, right, may cost you something. And I felt that really clearly in that moment.
That's a beautiful reflection when our nation's ideals and principles are under attack and we rise up to defend them. That's sort of when we feel most patriotic in a positive way, not a nationalistic way. So to round us out, the unscripted question is it's an easy one. Don't be scared. It's what are you reading? What are you reading right now? Can be heavy, can be light, can be whatever. So I'll start, then we'll go Robbie, Kristen, and we'll end with Diana. I am reading, so I read two books at a time typically. One is a history book, so I can keep sharp on things, and then one is some sort of fiction book. The fiction book is the Lincoln Lawyer series. I just started that, and it's been a fun little distraction. But the history book I'm reading is so interesting. It's called The Challenge of Joseph H. Jackson: How America's Most Powerful Black Preacher Became a Forgotten Man, and that's by Jared Alcantara. And Joseph H. Jackson was the head of the National Baptist Convention, and for 30 years, and including during the Civil Rights Movement, and was president during when MLK and other pastors broke off to form the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Fascinating man. And most people have never heard of him, even though he led the largest Black religious organization for close to 30 years. So that's what I'm reading. What about you, Robbie?
Well, I'm going to cheat one because I want to plug Catherine Stewart's great book, and it is the last thing I actually read. So, Money Lies in God by our friend and colleague Catherine Stewart. It is about to be hit the market. The subtitle is Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. She has an amazing, I mean, the whole book is so prescient, but there's a chapter on bashing the administrative state and destroying the administrative state that we're just seeing play out right in front of our eyes. So it's a book about yeah, how we got here. So all of our listeners, that should be right up your alley. So pick that up wherever books are sold, available near you. The other thing that I'm reading, I've been trying to read about 1 out of 4 books fiction. I've never been a big fiction reader. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been trying to pick up more fiction, some things that are, way off the grid for me. But actually, one of the most enjoyable fiction books I've read in a while is a book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Again, off the grid for me, but it is about the sort of, it's a novel set among the kind of gaming community in the 1990s, and about this, it's got romance, it's got like this kind of long-term story, but like I was a computer science major in the 80s and 90s, and so it's got all this old like tech, from the 90s that was like right up I worked as a computer consultant for a couple of years right in that era, so it was all this kind of nostalgia, kind of tech nostalgia for me, and that. But it's also like really well written. It's the book is written by, let me get the name right, Gabrielle Zevin is the author. Worth a read.
So good. Oh, you are definitely filling out the nerd card for our podcast here, but in the best way, in the best way. Um, Kristen, what do you got on your nightstand?
Okay, so, same with Robbie, Catherine Stewart's book. So good. It is just, I was just talking with a friend this morning about it, saying, I mean, of all of the books that are covering different aspects of what's going on, I think that is the most important one to read right now. It's Money Lies in God. It explains so much of the networks, and part of our problem in talking about the issues of the day is that they are complicated. I mean, on the surface level, it's pretty clear what's happening, but if you want to really understand who is doing what, who is behind this, the funding, the bigger philosophies, the alliances between different groups, that book is a must read. So absolutely, essential. Another brand new book that just arrived that I got to read in advance, and I wish I had it. It's in the other room, so I can't quite reach it and hold it up to you, is Malcolm Foley's new book that released this week, The Anti-Greed Gospel: Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism and How the Church Can Create a New Way Forward. So forget DEI, just delve right into the love of money is the root of racism, right? And it'd be really great for church groups, for, kind of small groups, discussion groups. It is a powerful book and it will unsettle you. And this is also another one of those books that gets at some of the deeper roots. Awesome. Thank you, Jamar. Um, Deeper roots, and in this case, theological and moral roots of our present circumstances. So both of those. And then I just grabbed this one, research. Right now, I'm reading The Inside Story of the Hollywood Christian Group because I'm writing about Dale Evans right now and trying to wrap up Live, Laugh, Love. So that in the midst of everything else is still happening.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, co-sign on the anti-greed gospel and of course, Money Lies in God. Diana, what are you reading?
I just finished reading a book called Love's Braided Dance. Love's Braided Dance, Hope in a Time of Crisis. And that's by Norman Wurzba, who is a theology professor at Duke Divinity School, and he's also the director of the university's Office on Research for Sustainability and Environmentalism. And so he's an amazing thinker in terms of Christian theology and the ethics of the earth. It's just has a body of work that is fantastic. This particular book has as its driving thesis that hope is not something you have. It's not an it that, some people have, some people don't. If you have it, hey, cool for you. But rather, hope is something you do. And so it's a series of essentially meditations on people who rose to practice what it means to live in a world of love, even in tremendously difficult circumstances. And he has an absolutely harrowing chapter. He's a white guy. And I think that, as soon as you think about a white guy writing a book on hope, you think, oh, what does he know? It's kind of, it looks like privilege. But as it turns out, he's the son of a couple who lived through the onslaught of World War II in Central Europe, in the part of Europe that's now under such contestation, Poland, Ukraine area. They were Germans. They became farmers in this area. And that meant that when World War II broke out, they were hated by everybody. They were hated by the Germans back home because they didn't live there. They didn't necessarily support Hitler. They were hated by the Poles and the Ukrainians, and they were hated by the Russians. And so his family became part of this brutalization of these communities of German expats that were in this part of Europe. And it just reminds you of the pain and suffering of regular people getting caught up in violent political movements and how much that can literally unhinge a life. And yet his parents wound up um, becoming immigrants to Canada. They moved to Western Canada and they bought a farm, and they eventually had four children, I believe, and created this beautiful life on this farm. And so it's about how they made a world of hope out of a world that was completely a world of devastation and utter brutality and hopelessness. So that's a really powerful book. I'm really glad I read it. It also has an extraordinary chapter about how the California dream of the golden future of America, which has shaped so much of 20th century thought, became the Silicon Valley nightmare. And boy, I asked him, I did an interview with him at my Substack, and I said, so did you know that Elon Musk and JD Vance were going to be such a big deal this year? And we talked about that, and he really helped. That chapter alone is worth the price of the whole book. And then two smaller things that I am reading are Pico Iyer's book, A Flame. Pico Iyer, wonderful a nonfiction writer, literary nonfiction writer out of Santa Barbara. I knew him years ago, there when I lived in Santa Barbara. And the book Aflame is his memoir of losing his house in a devastating fire in Santa Barbara County. And what it taught him, he went and lived in a monastery after this fire. And what it taught him about greed and life and love and what's really important. And it came out the same week that Los Angeles burned. And it's a powerful and beautiful book. And then the final one that I'm reading is Robin Wall Kimmerer, teaches at Syracuse University. She's a Native American, and she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Lots of braids in my books
Yes.
this week. But this book, I'm not reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which I read a long time ago, is her brand new book called Service Berries. And that's about, it's very short, it's beautiful, and it's about the gift economy and why gratitude is necessary to a life of justice and hope for the future.
Very relevant books and stories for now. Thank you all for sharing. I knew you'd have some good things, some really interesting books to
What are
share.
you reading, Jamar?
I had started with the Joseph H. Jackson ones.
Oh, yeah. Anything
Yeah,
else? Anything else for us?
just for work. Nothing. Yeah. But great episode. Thank y'all so much for contributing. On behalf of me and my co-host, thank you for joining the Convocation Unscripted. And of course, remember to subscribe to our newsletter, convocation.substack.com. And also, we each have our individual Substacks. The links for that are in the show notes. We'll see you soon at the next Convocation.